Masechta Klayim, Perek Beis, Mishnah Aleph. Kol Sosh Yesh B'Roiva Mimin Acher Yamayit. We learned in the previous Mishnah, the previous Perek, that planting two different kinds of seeds together is forbidden as Klayim. However, when large amounts of seeds are planted, it often happens that they contain some seeds of another kind. Midday Raisa, it's mutter to plant these seeds together as long as there's no intention to grow two different minim over here. The Chachamim, however, limited the amount of foreign seeds that can be present. For example, when grain is planted, it is dropped along the field from a sack of cedar scattered by the handfuls on the field. Technically, this is called sowing. We will use the more common term planting to refer to sowing as well. This is because, so why is it mutter? Because it's batal b'roiv. So also, it's natural for a certain amount of foreign seeds to become mixed into a large amount of seeds for one kind. Since seeds are small and difficult to separate, the Torah did not require the farmer to remove the minority seed, but allowed him to plant a mixture provided he does not intend to grow the second species together. When crops are put away in storage, it's also common for some foreign seeds to get mixed in from what was left in the storage area from a previous occasion. Similarly, in a field planted with a single crop, it's common for at least a few foreign plants to end up growing in the field and for their seeds to get mixed up with the others. So the seeds taken from the harvest to plant the next year's crop will often contain some mixture. When there's too much seed of a second kind, people may think that it was deliberately added in order to grow two kinds together, which is asur. So again, kol sosh yesh b'roiva mimin acher yamayit. Any sub seed in which there's a quarter kav of a different kind of seed, the farmer must reduce the other kind to less than a quarter kav before he may plant the seed. A sa contains 6 kavin, or 24 quarter kavin. A quarter kav is equal to the size of 6 eggs in volume. If a sa of seed contains within it a quarter kav or more of a different kind of seed, it means that 1/24 of the container of seed is made up of other minim. This is considered too high a percentage, and it's forbidden to plant the mixture until the minority seed is reduced to less than 1/24 of the mixture. This can be done either by removing some of the minority seed from the mixture or by adding to the majority seed. Rabbi Yosi Aimer Yava. Rabbi Yosi says once he begins reducing the other kind, he must remove it entirely. According to Rabbi Yosi, if a person begins removing the minority seed and then stops when he reduces it to less than 1/24 of the mixture, it looks like he wants to keep the rest of the foreign seed and plant klayim. To avoid this impression, he must remove some of the minority seed. He must continue to remove all of it. Rabbi Yosi agrees that if the minority kind was less than 1/24 of the mixture to begin with, he does not need to remove anything. Bein mimin echad, bein mishnei minim. The Mishnah is going to mention a machlekes regarding a quarter kav of foreign seed that is usher to plant together. It makes no difference whether the quarter kav of foreign seed is made up of one kind of seed or of more than one kind, or bein mishnei minim. Either way, he must reduce the total amount of foreign seeds to less than a quarter kav before he may plant the sa of seed. As long as there's a total of a quarter kav of other kinds of seed in the mixture, he must reduce them to less than a quarter kav according to the Tanakama, or eliminate them entirely according to Rabbi Yosi. Reb Shimon says, "Lo amru el mi min echad." They did not say that a quarter kav is different seed is usher unless the entire quarter kav is made up of one kind. However, if the quarter kav is made up of two different kinds of foreign seeds, he doesn't need to reduce the foreign seed. The Chachamim say, Kol shehu klayim basa mitzaref l'roiva. Any other species that is klayim with the majority of the sa combines with another kind of foreign seed to make up the quarter kav, that prohibits planting the mixture. But a species that is not klayim with the majority does not count towards the quarter kav. The Chachamim agree with the Tanakama that two different types of species combine to prohibit the mixture, but they add one condition: both species must be a type that's considered klayim with the majority species. If only one of the minority species is klayim with the majority species and the other one is not, the sa may be planted without reducing the amount of any minority seed. For example, if a sa of barley contained an eighth of a kav of oats and an eighth of a kav of spelt, which would be 1/4 together, he may plant a mixture without reducing the amount of oats and spelt seed. This is because only the spelt is klayim with barley, but the oats are not. The Tanakama, however, disagrees. He rules that even if only one of the two minority species is klayim with the majority species, such as the spelt in the above example, the sa may not be planted. This is because people may think that such a large amount of different kinds of seeds he must have added it purposely to make klayim together. Mishnah Beis. Bamed var mamurim. What are we talking about? What type of mixtures are we talking about? Tvua b'tvua, in regard to grain that became mixed in grain. Bekitnis, or kitnis that became mixed in kitnis. The term tvua refers to the chamisha minei dagan, which is chita sa'ira shebay l'shul shifay wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and rye. The term kitnius or kitnus refers to all other plants whose seeds are eaten. For example, beans, rice, peas, sesame, and all those type of things. So tvua bekitnus or kitnus betvua. If the grains became mixed with kitnus or kitnus that became mixed with tvua, be'emes amru. However, in truth, they said, whenever it says be'emes amru, it usually means that it's halacha l'moshe misinai. Look in the Gemara of Shabbos Afir Beis. If inedible seeds of garden plants became mixed with kitnus or tvua, the garden seeds combined to prohibit planting the mixed seeds even with less than a quarter kav, as long as there's enough garden seed in the mixture to plant 1/24 of what is usually planted of that kind of seed in a beisah. The term garden plants refers to vegetables such as radishes, turnips, garlic, and onions, which have an edible part, but the seeds themselves are not edible. This is in contrast to grains and beans, in which the edible part is the seed itself. So what's this cheshbon over here? A beisa is the area which a person plants a seah of wheat seeds. This measures 50 by 50 amas. However, garden seeds are much smaller than grains and beans, yet they produce large plants. For this reason, a beisa of land is not planted with a seah of garden seed, but with just a quarter seah of garden seed, for example. The exact amount depends on the type of garden plant. The Mishnah says that if just 1/24 of the amount of garden seed that would be planted in beisa is present in the mixture, it's usher to plant the mixture until it's reduced. Thus, in the example we mentioned, instead of a quarter of a kav being the amount of that, a 16th of a kav, which would be 1/96th of a seah of garden seed, would usher the rest of it. The reason for this is that this small amount of seed will end up growing plants that will take up 1/24 of the field. This much foreign growth gives the impression that it was planted with the intention of growing two species, which would be kalaim. The Chachamim therefore assered it. The measure of a quarter kav of foreign seed was set only for grains and kitnius. Since these species grow to take up approximately the same amount of space, the Chachamim fixed the amount for all of them at a quarter kav per seah of seed. Even different species of garden plant seeds combine to make a 1/24 that forbids the mixture, because these things aren't going to be eaten anyways. Reb Shimon says, just as the Chacham said this rule about garden seeds to be machmir, that is to aser planting a mixture containing even less than a quarter kav of garden seeds, so too they said this rule to be makel. For example, flaxseed that became mixed in grain combined to forbid the mixture only when it comes to 1/24 of what is usually planted of flaxseed in a beisah, even though this comes to much more than a quarter of a kav. The amount of flaxseed normally planted in beisah is 3 seah, 3 times the amount of wheat that would be planted there. Thus, 1/24 of the amount of flax planted in beisah is 3/4 of a kav rather than a quarter. Flaxseed that became mixed in grain, therefore, does not forbid planting the mixture unless there's 3/4 of a kav of flaxseed in it. The Mishnah's wording implies that the Tanna Kama does not accept this ruling. In his view, the 1/24 of what is usually planted rule for garden seeds applies only as long as it comes to less than a quarter kav. When it comes to more than a quarter kav, however, the halacha remains that even a quarter kav forbids the mixture. Mishnah Gimel. This Mishnah is going to teach us what a person must do when he plants in his field one species, then changes his mind and wants to plant it with another one. If his field is planted with wheat, and he changed his mind and decided to plant it with barley, he must wait for the seeds in it to grow roots. When the seed begins to send out roots, the roots are very thin and look like worms, like tailas. Sending out roots is therefore referred to as lahasliya, literally to become wormy. And then you should turn over the soil by plowing it and thereby destroying the infant wheat plants. And afterwards he can plant a field with barley. Once the seeds have produced roots, they will not grow new roots if the old ones die. The Mishnah therefore teaches that the farmer should wait until the wheat seed had begun to send out roots approximately 3 days after it was planted, as we know from Hilchos Shabbos as well, that by Zayreya, it's a big question how a person could be chayav for Zayreya if the seed only takes root 3 days later. So by you putting a seed in the ground on Shabbos, you're causing it that it should grow 3 days later. And then plow the field to kill the infant plants. This will prevent wheat from growing together with the barley he wishes to plant. If, however, the field is plowed before the seeds begin to send out roots, the seeds will just be moved from one place to another and will still take root among the barley plants, resulting in a field of kalaim. In Simcha, if the wheat already sprouted, that means that it broke through above the ground before he decided to plant a field with barley. Lo yoimar Ezra v'achikach oifach. He cannot say, I will plant the barley and afterwards turn over the soil. even though this would save him a lot of work, because it was the custom in Eretz Yisrael to plow the ground again after the seeds were planted to cover the seeds with earth, like the Gemara says in Shabbos. The farmer therefore prefers to plant the barley first and then plow the land, since the single plowing will both destroy the wheat and cover the barley. But he can't do that. Rather, he must turn over the soil first to destroy the wheat plants and only afterwards plant the barley. Once the wheat has sprouted, the farmer is not likely to forget to plow the field and destroy the wheat plants, since he sees them growing. So the Mishnah teaches that even so, we do not allow him to plant the barley and then plow the field, because planting barley in a field in which wheat has begun to grow gives the appearance of planting klayim. How much must he plow? The Mishnah is going to go through how much does he need to plow in order for him to be able to plant the next type. Ketalmei haravia, like the furrows of rain, like the furrows that are commonly plowed after the first rains have fallen. It was common in Eretz Yisrael to begin plowing after the first rain of the season has fallen. It generally doesn't rain in Eretz Yisrael during the summer. The first rains of the year fall shortly after Sukkot, like the Mishnah says in Tainis. So in Eretz Yisrael, it only rains after, it generally first starts to rain after Sukkot. So although this leaves some earth between the furrows unplowed, it is enough to show that he's not interested in growing two species. He is therefore permitted to plant the barley. It is not necessary to plow furrows so closely together that the entire surface of the field is plowed. As long as the furrows are spaced in the usual way, it is enough. Although this may allow some wheat plants to survive between the furrows, the crop will not be klayim, because the farmer has shown that he's not interested in having them grow. However, if enough wheat plants grow to make up 1/24 of the field, he will need to remove them, because then it will be real klayim, not just look like klayim. The reason why we're talking about Talmei Haravia over here, furrows of the rain, is used to contrast this type of plowing with the ones mentioned in Mishnah Vav, which we'll see in Mitzvah in a few minutes. Abba Shal says, Kadesh lo yishai reva lebeisa, you must plow enough so that there will not remain a base reva, a quarter of kav of unturned soil in a beisa, and Abba Shal is even more machmer than the Tanakam. A base reva is the amount of land that is planted with a quarter kav, 1/24 of a saw of seeds. According to Abba Shal, the total unplowed area must be less than 1/24 of the entire field. The first Tana, the Tanakama, allows the farmer to plow like furrows of the rain, even if all the unturned parts of the field will total more than 1/24 of the field. Abba Shal, on the other hand, requires that the total unturned amount be less than 1/24 of the field. Mishnah Daled. Zurua v'nimlach lenata. If someone wishes to replace his grapevines with a field of grain, or the other way around. If a field is planted with grain, and the farmer changed his mind and decided to plant it with grapevines, or he was originally planted with kitnias or garden plants, and now he wants to change it over to grapevines. So the Mishnah refers specifically to grapevines because there's no isser against planting grain next to other trees, as we learned in the first parak. The word lintaya for natius is used for planting trees which are planted one by one. When masha enkein lizraya is used for grain and beans and the like, for which many seeds are scattered over an area at once. So lo yoimar etavach kachoifach. He cannot say, I'll first plant the grapevines and then afterwards turn over the soil by plowing it. Rather, he must first turn over the soil to destroy the grain seeds and only afterwards plant the grapevines. Before plowing, he must wait for the grain to grow roots, as we learned in the previous Mishnah. Netua v'nimlach lazara. If a field is planted with grapevines and the farmer changed his mind and decided to plant it with grain, lo yoimar ezer v'yachakach ashresh. He cannot say, I'll first plant the grain and afterwards uproot the grapevines. El misharish v'yachakach sereya. Rather, he must first uproot the grapevines and afterwards plant the grain. The grain must be destroyed by means of turning over the soil by plowing, and grapevines must be uprooted to prevent further growth. Imratza, however, there is a kula over here. If he wants, goyme ma'pachas mitafach. He can cut off the grapevines close to the ground until less than a tefach of the vine remains above ground. Zereya v'yachikach masharish, and he may then plant the grain and uproot what remains in the grapevines afterwards. A tefach is between 3 and 4 inches, and once a grapevine has been cut this close to the ground, it's uncommon for it to grow again. This serves to show that the owner is no longer interested in it, so that even if it does regrow, he's not going to be over on climb. The Mishnah recommends uprooting the grapevines after cutting them down to this level, because it's possible that they will start growing again. However, there's no chiyuv to do so unless they actually start growing again. So only if they really start growing, not because when hastam they won't. They won't grow again, and then he doesn't have to worry about climb. Also, he shows that he's not interested in them. Mishnah Hey. The Mishnah teaches halacha for certain minim, certain kinds of plants, for which turning the soil does not destroy the growth. If his field is planted with caraway seeds or luf, some have the gears of karbos instead of kanvos. That would be the Rambam, and the Rambam explains that some say that this is caraway. Rashi in Menachos says luf is a type of bean, although the Rambam learns that it's a kind of onion. So lo yehei zereya uba al gabeim. He may not plant another species over them, even if he plows the field first. She'enon oisen ela l'shalosh shanim, because they produce plants only after 3 years. Thus, there may be many seeds in the ground that have not yet taken root and cannot be destroyed by plowing. The seeds of these species can remain buried in the ground for up to 3 years before taking root. Plowing a field in which they've been planted is therefore no use in killing the plants. Even if the farmer sees that the caraway or luf has begun to grow, that is, the plants are visible above ground, there may be many caraway or luf seeds under the ground that have not yet sprouted roots, and for those seeds plowing will not help, so it doesn't even help to be chayrish. So what do you have to do? That's why he may not plant another species on them, even if he plows the field first. Is this? If there was a field of grain in which aftergrowths of istis came out. Aftergrowths are plants that grow on their own from seeds that fell into the soil during the previous year's harvest. Wheat was being grown on a field that had previously been used to grow istis. New istis plants now grew up among the wheat from seeds that had fallen off last year, which is common with the istis plant. Istis is a plant whose leaves were used to produce a blue indigo dye. The common name for this plant is woad, W-O-A-D. Istis is harmful to the grain crop, so you wouldn't even want it there. And similarly, if in the place of the threshing floors many different kinds of vegetables came out, the threshing floor is often used to thresh different kinds of crops, so thus it is not unusual for a number of different species to sprout there. However, the surface of a threshing floor needs to be smooth. It is therefore undesirable to have any plants growing on such a surface. Similarly, if there was a field of fenugreek in which a variety of grasses came out, fenugreek is a plant with edible seeds. It's common for different grasses and weeds to grow among fenugreek plants, but these are bad for the fenugreek and you want them. We do not obligate him to weed out the foreign species. In all of these 3 cases, it's obvious that the farmer does not want the foreign species to grow since they're damaging to him. Therefore, no one will suspect him of wanting to grow klayim. That is, no one will suspect him of either having intentionally planted klayim or of wanting the klayim to continue growing. Therefore, the chachamim were not mechayiv him to remove the foreign species. The reason there's no actual isser of klayim here is that the farmer didn't plant them, doesn't know the existence of the foreign seeds when he planted the first min. So he's not going to be chayiv for klayim, nor is he chayiv for maintaining klayim, because what the prohibition applies only when he wants the klayim to grow. The only problem is what people may think he did, which is maris ayin, that there's klayim here, since it's clear in these cases that he doesn't want these foreign plants to grow. This too is a non-issue also. However, if he weeded or cut down some of the foreign species, we say to him he has to uproot everything except for one kind. By not eliminating everything, he shows that he wants some of the foreign species to grow. He is therefore over on maintaining klayim. Nikesh refers to removing the plant together with its roots. Kisach is to cut only the part of the plant which is above ground, leaving the roots untouched. By removing some of the foreign species, but not all of it, the farmer indicates that he does want what is left. He thus appears to be violating the Isra of being Mekayim Klayim. This suspicion is heightened by the fact that he did not have to remove anything, yet he removed some of them and left others. For this reason, it's not sufficient to reduce the foreign species to less than 1/24 of the field. Rather, he must uproot all foreign species, leaving only one of the species in place. Okay, Mishnah Vav. The rest of this parak, as well as parak Gimel, teaches how a field may be planted so as to allow different crops to be planted close to one another. The Mishnah addresses a case of someone who wishes to plant several strips of different species in a single field. The basic rule of klayim is that planting different species together is usur only when they appear to be mixed. The definition of the word klayim is mixture, which implies that the species appear to be mixed together. An appearance of being mixed depends on many factors, such as the distance between the two species, the size of the field as a whole, the types of species being planted near each other, the kind of separations between them, the way the different areas are shaped, and other factors. Any separation or formation that causes the species to look separate from each other removes the Klayim prohibition. The Chachamim define the separations for us in the Mishnayos that follow. So Haraitza Latza Sedeu Meishar Meishar Mikol Min. If someone wishes to make his field into separate strips, a Meishar is a rectangular patch. It's longer than it is wide. That's at least 6 tvachim wide. We're going to discuss the halachas for a square patch in Mishnah Tes. So each planted with a different species. So Beis Shammai Oimrim Shloisha Tlamim Shel Pasiach. Beis Shammai say he must leave a gap the size of 3 ground-breaking furrows between the strips. The ground-breaking furrows are furrows made when a field is plowed while the earth is still dry and hard. These are spaced farther apart than the Talmei Revia that we mentioned earlier. According to the Rishalmi, 3 ground-breaking furrows are 2 amas wide. The empty space must also be at least 2 amas long. That is, as long as there is a square of empty land 2 by 2 amas between the 2 strips, they are not klayim, even if the rest of the area between the strips is narrower than 2 amas. Beis Hillel say Beis Hillel say the strips must be separated by the width of the yoke used in Sharain. Beis Hillel's measure is just slightly smaller than Beis Shammai. And the words of Beis Hillel are close to being like the words of these of Beis Shammai, that the 2 measures are nearly identical. And many times we find that this is what the Mishnah says in terms of Machlekes, Shammai and Hillel. There's a very small difference, but for whatever reason they held that they held the different shitas. Mishnah Zayin. Hayreish tarchitim nichnas b'soich shel sa'arim. The Mishnah now discusses planting crops and formations that make it unnecessary to leave any space at all between them. These formations make it clear to the eye that the 2 species are not mixed, but are planted in what looks like 2 different fields. If there was a corner of a field, a reish tar is a corner of a field. Tar is the name of a triangular earring worn by women. It's mentioned in Shir Hashirim. The term reish tar, the head of the tar, is used in a borrowed sense to refer to any angle that comes to a point, even if it's not part of a triangle. Thus, a corner of a square field that touches another field is referred to as reish tar. As the pasuk says, "Turei zahav nasalach." So, if there was a reish tar of wheat that extended into a field of barley, that is, it touched the side of the barley field but did not actually enter it, meaning that the corner of the field is touching another min field, mutter, it's mutter. Because the reish tar looks like the end of the wheat field and not like wheat planted in a barley field. The previous case referred to 2 fields owned by the same person. The Mishnah now teaches the halacha for fields owned by 2 different people. If his field is planted with wheat and his neighbor's field is planted with another kind of crop, and there's an empty space between them, the empty space belonged to him. He could have planted wheat there right up to the border of his neighbor's field, because there's no issur to plant 2 species next to each other when the field is owned by a different person. This is learned from the pasuk Sodachal, or says your field you shall not plant with a mixture of seeds. However, the Mishnah discusses a case where he did not plant right up to his property line, but left an empty space on his side of the line, which now he wants to plant. So mutar lismach le'me'osa, it's permitted for him to plant in the empty space next to his wheat the same kind of crop as the one growing in his neighbor's field, provided he plants this new crop all the way up to the border of his neighbor's field. By doing so, the second species looks like it's part of the neighbor's field. Therefore, even though he is now growing 2 different species in his own field, it's not considered klayim. So, for example, a person had wheat growing in his field, but he left an area between the wheat and his neighbor's field unplanted. His neighbor's field is planted with barley right up to the border between the fields. He may now plant barley in the empty space he left, as long as he planted all the way up to the border with his neighbor's field. Normally, a person is not allowed to plant barley next to his own wheat. You need to have some kind of separation. But in our case, since he plants a barley next to his neighbor's barley field, the new barley appears to be part of the neighboring field and not part of his own. Since it doesn't look like a mixture of wheat and barley in one field, it's mutter without making any separation. Shaloi chitim shal chaveri chitim. But what's going to happen if a person's field is planted with wheat and his neighbor's field is also planted with wheat? Mutter lismach leitelim shal pishton. He's permitted to place in the empty space next to his wheat a furrow of flax, in order to test the soil to see whether it's suitable for growing flax. But he may not place a furrow of any other kind of species in that empty space. Since farmers do not grow just one furrow of flax, people seeing one furrow of flax planted at the end of the field realize that it was planted just to test the soil. A farmer who plants a row of flax at the end of his field to test the soil has no intention of using the flax plants that grow, because it doesn't provide enough flax to be of any real benefit. This is considered like planting a crop in order to destroy it before it grows fully, which is mutter. Moreover, since it is uncommon for a person to plant just a single row of flax, no one will suspect him of planting Klayim. Everyone will realize that he planted it only as a test and not raise a crop. This is true, however, only for flax. Other species are sometimes planted even in single rows, because even one row of them provides enough produce to benefit from. Therefore, even if the farmer planted only as a test, it's forbidden because people will think he's planting it to raise that crop as well. Even in the case of flax, it's only mutter if he planted at the end of his field next to his neighbor's field. He cannot plant it in the middle of his field because people generally do not plant test rows in the middle of their field. Doing so therefore looks like planting Klayim. The Mishnah teaches that even so he can plant between his wheat and his neighbor's wheat, and it's a non-issue. Reb Shimon says, Echad Zarapishtan v'echad Kalminu, whether this one furrow is flaxseed or any other species, it's also because it looks like Klayim. Reb Shimon is concerned that people may think he needs just a little bit of flax, even though normally you wouldn't. A person doesn't use that little amount of flax, but maybe you're chayshish that people are going to use it. Rabbi Yossi says, even in the middle of the field, it's mutter to test the soil with the furrow of flax. According to Rabbi Yossi, people seeing a furrow of flax, even in the middle of a field, will realize that it's been planted just to test the soil. Rabbi Yossi agrees with the Tanna Kama that only a furrow of flax is permitted and only for testing purposes. However, unlike the Tanna Kama, Rabbi Yossi allows this furrow to be planted anywhere in the field and is not limited to the row right next to the neighbor's field. Mishmiches. We learned in the previous Mishnah that a person may plant a row of flax between his wheat field and his neighbor's wheat field, provided his intention is not to grow flax, but only to test whether the soil is suited for it. Our Mishnah discusses the same idea with respect to certain other crops. Again, we may not plant a furrow of mustard or saffron next to a field of grain, even though the intention is merely to test whether the soil is suited to them. Since people sometimes grow just a single furrow of these crops, it's not obvious that he planted the furrow just as a test. As we learned in the previous Mishnah, the only reason it's permitted to grow a single furrow of flax between two fields is that it's unusual to do so, and people will therefore realize that it was done as a test. Mustard and safflower, however, are grown even in a single furrow, since a small amount of them are useful. Planting a single furrow of them is therefore forbidden, since it looks like Klayim. However, he may plant a furrow of mustard or saffron next to the field of vegetables for the purpose of testing the soil. Since mustard and saffron are harmful to the vegetables, everyone will realize that he has no intention of letting them grow to maturity. One may plant a new species next to a strip of unplowed land that's neither plowed or planted, and has another species growing on the other side of it, or next to plowed land that has not yet been planted. It was common to plow a field and leave it unplanted for a year to restore its strength. In order for unfarmed or plowed land to separate between two fields with different species, it must have a certain size. For example, a field of grain needs an empty space of a base reva, which is 10 by 10 amas, to separate it from other grain. However, the size varies depending on the type of species involved, as we'll see in Mishnah Yud. Vilagapa, or a stone wall. This is a wall built of stones piled one on top of the other without cement to hold them together. The Mishnah tells us that even such a wall is sufficient to separate between different species. Viladerech, or a private road, which is only Daled Amas wide, as we spoke in Masechta Peah. Vilagoder Gavoya Asar Tvachim, or a fence that's 10 Tvachim high. To qualify as a divider, the fence must be at least 4 Tvachim long, which is the minimum length of a mechitza, in addition to being 10 Tvachim high. However, there's no minimum thickness required for the wall. Even the thinnest wall serves as a mechitza. There are 6 Tvachim in an amma. An amma is between 18 and 24 inches, depending on different opinions. So the wall must be between 12 and 16 inches long and between 30 and 40 inches high. The 10 tefach height requirement taught here applies also to the wall of stones discussed above of the gapa. Or a ditch that's 10 tvachim deep and 4 tvachim wide, that is 4 tvachim across. A ditch that's not 4 tvachim across is too narrow to be considered separation, since one can easily step over it. Like the wall, the ditch must also be at least 4 tvachim long. Or a tree that covers the ground with its branches, they hang down to the ground. This refers to a tree at least 10 tvachim high, whose branches and leaves are dense and close together and hang down to within 3 tvachim of the ground. A gap of less than 3 tvachim is regarded as closed, based on the concept of lavud. Their branches and leaves thus form a legal wall that separates between crops planted underneath the tree inside the wall and crops planted in the field next to the tree outside the wall. or a rock that's 10 tvachim high and 4 tvachim wide. All of these items serve to separate between different species, and is therefore permitted to plant one species on one side of them and another species on the other side. So the sela gavoya, that's 4 tvachim long, wide refers here not to the thickness of the rock, but to its span along the border between the fields. As with the fence discussed above, there's no minimum thickness required for the rock. All these items serve to separate between different species, and is therefore permitted to plant one species on one side of them and another species on the other side of them. Mishnah Tes. If a person wishes to make his field into many squares of all different types, a karachas is a bare patch. An empty patch that has been prepared for planting but has not yet been planted is called a karachas if it's a square. If it's longer than it is wide, it's called a meshar, a strip. As we mentioned earlier, karachas is lashon of bald, which is a empty spot. He makes 24 squares to a base of land. Mikarachas lebeis reva, each square measuring a base reva. A base saw measures 2,500 square amas. Since there are 24 revas, quarter kavs in a saw, as we learned previously, a base reva is 1/24 of a base saw. This is an area of about 104 square amas, which can be made into a square measuring approximately 10.2 amas on each side. So each square is measuring 10 amas by 10 amas and 2.5 tvachim. That's close enough to a square to be considered a karachas. And he plants whatever kind of species he wants in each square. Squares of this size appear to be separate from each other and not mixed. They are therefore not considered to be klayim. Although this means that many different species are being planted right next to each other with no separation between them, this Tana holds that because of their square shape and their base reva size, they are viewed as separate and distinct from one another, and do not appear to be mixed. They are therefore not klayim. However, the meshar mentioned in Mishnah Vav do require separations between them because they are not squares. Since a Beis contains 24 base revas, the maximum number of species a person can plant in a Beis is 24. If there were one or two unplanted squares in a field of grain, Zayram Chardal, he may plant them with mustard. Shalosh, however, if there are 3 unplanted squares, Lo Yizraim Chardal, he may not plant them with mustard. Because then it will look like a field of mustard. When 3 or more base revas of mustard are planted in a field of grain, they look like a field of mustard growing inside a field of grain. This is because mustard is normally planted in small patches. 3 base revas is therefore a large enough amount to look like a field of mustard. As we learned in the previous Mishnah, it's forbidden to plant a field of mustard next to a field of grain. Planting 3 base revas of other kinds of crops near a field of wheat, however, is not problematic because such crops are usually planted over large areas. 3 base revas of them therefore do not look like a field. Thus, according to Reb Meir, the special leniency for a base reva planted in the shape of a square is because it's too small to look like a field and yet large enough and distinctive enough not to look like individual plants growing in a field of something else. Divrei Reb Meir, Azay Zok Reb Meir, Chachamim say Teisha Karachas Mutarais Eser Azurais. 9 squares are permitted in a Beisa, but 10 are forbidden. And the Sheitas HaChachamim is that squares containing different species may not be planted right next to each other, but must be separated by empty squares. This allows only 9 squares to be planted in a Beisa. That is, they must be separated by a base rev of unplanted land if grain is involved. So thus only 9 base rev squares can be planted in the Beisa. It is not possible to fit even 9 planted squares in the Beisa if all the empty squares also have to be a full base rev, which is 10 by 10 amos. The sages were lenient and allowed the empty land between the planted squares to be slightly less than a base rev, just 9.7 amos wide, rather than 10.2, in order to make it possible to plant 9 base revas in a square Beisa. Thus, according to the Chachamim, squares are treated more strictly than the Meshar mentioned in the Mishnah Vav. Those required as a separation of only 2 by 2 amas, whereas squares require a separation of a full base reva. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, "Afilu kol tzadei base kur." Even if a person's entire field is a base kur, which is 30 base cells, lo yasa b'seicha chutz mikarachas achas, he may not make it into more than 1 square of different species. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov takes a far more stringent position than the Chachamim. He rules that even in a field as large as a base core, which is 30 base cells, it's forbidden to plant more than a single square of a different crop. The reason for this is not known. What does the Rab say? B'taima de Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov lo yasparish. Oh no. Al pisoid. Mishnah Yud. Kol shu b'seich base reva. Anything that's within the base reva. The previous Mishnah taught that a separation of a base reva is needed between two squares. The Beis Reva is a square measuring 10 by 10 amas. The Mishnah now teaches what can be included in the Beis Reva. Anything that is within the Beis Reva, oila b'midas Beis Reva, counts towards the measures of the Beis Reva. For example, cracks in the ground that are filled with water. These are considered a natural part of the field, provided they are less than 10 tefachim deep. For this reason, they count towards the measure of Beis Reva, even though they are not fit to plant. Achilas hagefen, the work area around a grapevine, v'hakever v'hasela oila b'midas Beis Reva. The work area around a grapevine, which is 6 tefachim, is eaten or consumed by the vine. It's needed surrounding a grapevine to work it. V'hakever, and a grave, and a rock, oilam amidas Beis Reva, all count towards the measure of Beis Reva. Although the work area around the vineyard must not be planted with another species, the Tan of our Mishnah holds that the work area around the single grapevine is mutter for planting. Since it's permitted to plant in this area, leaving it empty shows that the owner does not want to mix different species and therefore counts towards the Beis Reva and needed to separate between the two crops. It's forbidden to have benefit from a kever, like the Gemara says in Sanhedrin Daf Mem Ches Amud Aleph, and thus forbidden to grow crops on it. Nevertheless, a grave counts towards the Beis Reva because people looking at the field do not see a grave and do not realize that it's forbidden to plant here. Therefore, it looks like an area being left unplanted as a separation. The rock we speak of here is one that's not 10 tefachim high. If it were, it would serve as a wall in its own right, like we saw in Mishnah Ches, and would not need a count, and we would not need to count it to be part of the Beis Reva. Rocks this low are also considered natural parts of the field, like the Gemara says in Bava Basra and Kuv Gimel. They therefore count, even though they cannot be planted. Tvua b'tvua, if someone wishes to plant one kind of grain in a field of another kind of grain, Beis Reva, he needs to separate it from what is already growing by a Beis Reva. For example, if he wishes to plant barley in a field of wheat, he must leave a Beis Reva of unplanted land on all sides. Additionally, he must begin planting the barley from the edge of the field, so that the barley should not be completely surrounded by wheat. The barley does not have to be separated by a Beis Reva along the entire border with the wheat. As long as there's an unplanted Beis Reva square anywhere along its border with the wheat, it's clear that they're separate fields. The line of separation between the barley and the wheat beyond this Beis Reva may then converge towards each other at an angle until they meet at a point. Yerek b'yerek, if he wishes to plant vegetables of one kind in a field of vegetables of another, shisha tvachim. 6 tvachim are needed to separate between them. The width of 6 tvachim must be maintained for length of 6 tvachim as well. After that, it may narrow and converge at an angle towards the rest of the field. Shisha tvachim tuah b'yarek yerek b'tuah Beis Reva. If he plants a grain in a field of vegetables or vegetables in a field of grain, a Beis Reva is needed for them. This is true only for a row that is square. If a row in the shape of a rectangle longer than is wide, a separation of 6 tvachim is enough, and this will be explained in the next parak. Rabbi Lezer says Yerek b'tvua shisha tvachim. Rabbi Lezer says for vegetables in a field of grain, 6 tvachim is enough. Rabbi Lezer treats vegetables next to grain according to the more kuladige halacha of vegetables. The Tanakama treats them according to the more chumradige halacha of grains. Mishnah Yud Aleph. Tvua neitel gabe tvua. If grain of one kind leans over grain of another kind, the Mishnah speaks of 2 different species of grains that were separated by the proper distance, which would be a Beis Reva in the case of grain, but the stalks of one species grew so tall that they leaned and drooped over the stalks of the other species, so they looked mixed. The yerek al gabe yerek, or vegetables of one kind lean over vegetables of another kind. Tvua al gabe yerek, or grain that leans over vegetables. Yerek al gabe tvua, or vegetables over grain. Hakol mutter. It's all mutter chutz midlas yivanis, except for in the case of a Greek gourd, whose leaves become entangled with those of other plants when they lean over them. Greek gourds grow very large leaves which extend outward. When these come in contact with the leaves and stalks of other plants, they get entangled with them to a greater extent than do leaves of other species. This creates an appearance of climb. When this happens, the gourd plants must be uprooted. Reb Meir says, Av hakishus upol hamitzri, the same is true for cucumbers and Egyptian bean plants. These two tend to lean over and become entangled with other plants, and they too are forbidden. This is the tradition I heard. V'roya ani es divrei midvorai. However, I see what the Tanakama says as being more correct than my own. Rameir heard from his Rebbeim that cucumbers and Egyptian beans have the same halacha as the Delas Yavonis. He was therefore bound to teach their ruling. Rameir himself thought that the sage's tradition that only the Greek gourd was so entangling that it was forbidden was more correct. Ad Kan, Parak Beis.